Okay, well, the last time we were together, we started talking about ancient Greece, and we finished up talking about um, two major cities in ancient Greece. We spent maybe 12 minutes or so talking about ancient Sparta the last time we were together, and I tried to communicate to you that Sparta is a heavily militarized society. It has a very unique culture in the ancient world, and I use that as an example of how the city gives you your identity. The city tells you who you are, it tells everybody else who you are. And then I said the second city we'd be talking about. Whoop, there we go. Would be the city of Athens. So far in the semester, we've been moving pretty fast. I mean, if you think about it, we've already covered about 30,000 years of history. I mean, that's a lot. At this rate, we'll be done in no time. We spent maybe 30 minutes or so talking about the prehistoric period. We took a look at two ancient riverine civilizations. We spent maybe 12 minutes talking about ancient Sumer. We spent maybe 30 minutes talking about ancient Egypt. I spent maybe about 10, 12 minutes talking about ancient Sparta. Well, now's the time to slow down a little bit and to put on the brakes and take a good hard look around at ancient Athens. We're going to be in Athens for quite a while. Now's the time to slow down and be a little more serious and take a good look at things. I want us to spend some time talking about Athens, and I want you to spend some time thinking about Athens. I want you to spend actually a couple of weeks out of your life just thinking every once in a while about ancient Athens. Because there's an awful lot of stuff that comes out of Athens that has played a major role in shaping the world that you live in. A number of historians have argued, and I'm one of them, that Western culture is built on two foundation cities. That there are two foundation cities in the ancient world whose ideas and values and ways of life and worldviews, ways of looking at the world, thinking about the world, blend together to provide the foundation of the culture that you live in. And well, Athens is the first of these cities to talk about. A lot of stuff comes out of Athens which has played a major role in shaping your life, and I know you don't believe me today. But I think that after a couple of weeks of taking a little bit of time every once in a while and thinking about ancient Athens, you'll say, yeah, an awful lot of stuff does come out of ancient Athens. It's worth taking some time to think about. It's worth taking some time to think about, and so I want you to do that. And we're going to be taking some time to take a good hard look at ancient Athens. And Western culture celebrates Athens in a lot of different ways. In fact, really for the rest of the semester, we'll be saying ways that Athens remembers and our Western culture remembers and celebrates Athens and looks backward to Athens as one of its foundation cities. There are references to Athens on the money in your pocket. There are references to Athens in the architecture on this campus. You can't drive very far in Ocala without seeing dozens of references to Athens all over the place. And that's part of this course to start to help you notice some things that are around you. There are references to Athens all over the world that you live in. But one way that Athens is remembered and celebrated in Western culture is with a race, a very long foot race, the marathon race. The marathon race, the Boston Marathon and New York City Marathon and the Olympic Marathon. Those are the big three, and then just about every place has a marathon. The Ocala Marathon's running this Saturday, I believe. Anybody running it? Not me. Man, you could just lie and raise your hand. Everybody would be like, wow. Yeah, the Ocala Marathon's this Saturday. And maybe in a class this size, I don't know, maybe in a class this size, someone will know, because someone almost always knows, the official length of the Olympic marathon. What's the official length of the marathon race? That's right, 26.2 miles. 26.2 miles. 26 miles, 385 yards are 26.2 miles. That's why if you're driving around town and you see somebody in a car with a little bumper sticker on the back that says 26.2, that means they're bragging that they ran a marathon. If you see a sticker that says 13.1, they're bragging they ran half a marathon. Although that one always gets me. I mean, why would you make a big deal out of running half a marathon? Now, I can't run it either. I'm not saying I could run it. I'm just saying I ran half a marathon. I can't do it either. I'm just saying, why would you make a big deal about it? Why not go for the whole thing and then put the sticker on your? I don't know. It's none of my business. But the marathon race, you're familiar with the marathon race, and some of you may know may know the story here. The marathon race, 26 miles. 26.2 miles. 26 miles, 385 yards is a very specific distance, and it's the distance from the center of a battlefield, right outside the city of Marathon in Greece, to the city gates of Athens. It's a very precise distance, and it's a precise distance on purpose. and I want to tell you the story of the Battle of Marathon. At one point, ancient Greece is invaded by the Persian Empire. Now, the Persian Empire is one of those empires that we could have talked about when we talked about ancient Mesopotamia and the different empires which sweep through Mesopotamia at different points. The Persian Empire originates, well, actually in a scattered number of cities that eventually became united in the Persian Empire. Eventually, the leadership of those cities would pass to roughly where the city of Tehran is today. It was called Ray back in the day, but the same city, it's just changed its name. Um, Eventually, the city of Tehran would become the leader of these confederation of cities, and eventually the empire would begin spreading to the west. It spreads across where Iraq is today, down into where Egypt is today. I told you Egypt was only successfully invaded once in its 3,000 years of history, and Persia invades it. Spreads across where Turkey is today, and eventually begins to encroach on ancient Greece, and at one point launches an invasion of ancient Greece. And just because of geography, the Persian soldiers got off the boats right outside the city of Marathon in Greece. And then just because of geography, the closest big city to Marathon is the city of Athens. And so the Athenian army is called out to defeat the Persians, which they do at the Battle of Marathon, defeat them soundly. In fact, defeat the Persians so badly that the Persians not only abandon the battlefield, but they give up on the entire campaign, back on the ships and head back to Persian territory. They'll be back a couple of decades later, but for about 20 years or so, the Persians know to stay away from Athens. Well, anyway, as the battle is over and it becomes apparent that not only have the Persians abandoned the battlefield, but they've abandoned the entire invasion, the Athenian general gathers the surviving Athenian soldiers in the center of the battlefield, and he says, he announces to them that Athens lives. He says, our way of life is going to continue. We won't have to live the way the Persians tell us how to live. We can worship our own gods. We can have our own laws. We can run our lives the way we want to run our lives. And he says, I need a volunteer. I need a volunteer to run back home and to announce the news that Athens lives. And one kid jumps up and says, I'll do it. I call him a kid. He's 14 years old in the story. His name is Philippides. Philippides, this 14-year-old kid, jumps up and says, I'll do it. And he lays aside his sword and his shield. He doesn't need them anymore. The battle's over. And he takes off running for home. Home is 26 miles, 385 yards away, quite a distance. And he runs all the way back home to carry that news. And he runs his heart out. Literally, he runs his heart out. He makes it to the city gates of Athens. He stumbles to the gates. He gasps out, rejoice! He says, Athens lives. And he drops to the ground. He's dead of a heart attack. Literally, he runs his heart out. And he's remembered by Athens for running his heart out. That's why 2,500 years later, 2,400 years later, his name's even remembered. He runs his heart out. And obviously, carrying that news was important to that kid. It was important to Philippides that he be the one who carries the news home, that he be the one to volunteer. And obviously, that news meant something to him because he was so burned with passion to get that news back home that he ran his heart out. And at some point on those 26.2 miles he had to know that he pushed himself too far, but he held himself together to get back home. And that's that Athens lives. And obviously that news was important to that kid. It meant something to that kid. And this is one of those stories that comes to us out of the ancient world that it's a powerful story. There's a lot there to think about. But it's also hard for us to identify with the kid in the story. It's one of those stories in the ancient world which we can think about and even be on some level kind of moved about. It kind of has a lot of stuff to think about. But it's also hard to identify with the kid. I mean, how many of us would run 26.2 miles to announce that Ocala lives? Our way of life as Ocalans will continue. We won't have to live the way the Gainesvillians tell us how to live. We can worship our own gods. We can worship the thoroughbred. They won't force us to worship the gator. We can worship our own gods. I'm kind of having fun with the idea, but also there's this serious point here that there's some kind of connection to the community and some kind of attachment to the city that it's hard for us to identify with. And when I say that the city gives you your life's meaning, gives you identity in ancient Greece, I mean something really serious. That means an awful lot to this kid that his city is going to survive. And when the marathon races are run today, Yeah, we're celebrating the athletic performances and sometimes the incredible, amazing athletic performances that come out of the marathon races. But we're also remembering and celebrating that kid and the new Athens lives. Because I can tell you that whether you have ever even heard of the Battle of Marathon before or not, or whether you really believe me or not, it doesn't matter, that for by far most of you, the Battle of Marathon is one of the most important battles in your life, maybe the most important battle in your life. Because if the thing had turned out the other way around, if the Athenians had been defeated, then at this point in your life, many of you would be sitting in seats like this, and I'd be telling you that there are two foundation cities which have played a role in shaping the lives that you live and shaping the culture you live in, and that one of these foundation cities is the city of Tehran, and that the values and worldviews and way of life that comes out of Tehran has played a major role in shaping the lives that you live. And well, I can tell you that your lives would be an awful lot different, an awful lot different. Just think, was it, I guess, 3 summers ago, people in the streets of Tehran demanding the government even pretend to count their votes. It's interesting, the demonstrators said, we know you're going to lie about the numbers, but at least do us the honor of pretending like you're going to count them. It was only last year, a whole bunch of you wouldn't be in seats like this. The government of Tehran announced that almost all college majors are closed to female entrants. Only men can major in almost all the majors available in college, almost all the majors available here at CF. And your lives would be very different kinds of places. And that's what I mean when I say an awful lot of stuff that comes out of Athens has played a role in shaping the world you live in, whether you've ever cared about or known about it before. There's an awful lot that comes out of Athens that's worth thinking about. Well, in a world history course, we would talk more about the Battle of Marathon, and I might give you maybe 10 minutes about the strategy that went into defeating the Persians there. And we might talk about what causes the Persian Wars. There are 2 of them. They're about 20 years apart, but we don't go into all of that in this course here. At another point, another war breaks out, this time a war between Athens and Sparta. These 2 big cities in ancient Greece go to war with each other. At the time that war breaks out between Sparta and Athens, Athens has developed a unique form of government in the ancient world. It's a form of government called a democracy. First, let me explain what a democracy is, and then tell you how democracy works in Athens. In a democracy, every citizen votes on every issue. Every citizen votes on every issue. Or I should say every citizen who cares to votes on every issue. Because just like today, a lot of people don't care about what the issues are and whatever, but so who cares what they have to say about something? But citizens who care to vote on every issue. The story of democracy in Athens is a long story. It would take us maybe a day in a world history course to talk about the development of democracy. It's a long story, but it starts off with the citizens of Athens saying, we don't need some little king bossing us around. We don't need some little petty dictator bossing us around. The people can have the power. We can make our own decisions. We don't need some king telling us what to do. We can run our own lives. And so the citizens got rid of their dictator. Well, and then comes the hard work. Over and over again in the story of the spread of liberty, I guess, the same story. You get rid of the dictator, and then what? Then comes the hard work, usually. The easy work is getting rid of the dictator. Don't get me wrong, as difficult as that may be, as hard work as that might be to get rid of the dictator, sometimes the hard work comes next, because then what? Well, it's a long story. There are good things that happen. There are bad things that happen. There are good decisions. There are poor decisions. But eventually, and it takes some time to work its way through, the people figure out a system that they think works for them, what they call democracy, where the citizens have the power, the people have the power. The ruling body of Athens under Athenian democracy was an organization or a body called the Assembly. I don't happen to have that on the PowerPoint. It's just the word assembly, A-S-S-E-M-B-L-Y, assembly. The assembly meets every 10 days on schedule. There's no secret meeting place or anything like that. Every 10 days, the assembly meets on schedule. And every citizen who shows up that day for the assembly meeting is a member of the assembly. That's as simple as membership in the assembly is. If you're a citizen of Athens and you care to show up on the day the assembly meets, well, on that day you happen to be a member of the assembly. Every morning of the 10th day, runners who are hired by the city run through the city of Athens and call out that the assembly meets today to remind everybody. In the afternoon, it's time for everybody who wants to show up that day to gather. The assembly elects a mayor to preside over the meetings and run the meetings and to carry out the wishes of the assembly. And so, as the citizens gather, when everybody shows up at the proper time, the mayor calls the meeting to order. And during these 9 days in between the meeting, the mayor has been traveling around the city, talking to people, asking them what the problems are in the city. And at the start of the meeting, the mayor says, I've got an agenda here. These are all the issues I know we need to talk about to address the needs of the city today. And he says, item number 1, let's just make something up. He says, item number 1. Today we're going to decide what the property tax rate is going to be for property taxes in the city next year. And the mayor says, does everybody understand what we're talking about? Everybody kind of nods at him. And the mayor says, okay, we're going to discuss property tax rates for next year. And citizens begin to stand up here and there and make their way down to a podium at the front of the assembly. And they get in a line there. And citizen number 1, first citizen in the line says, I'm honored to speak to you today. I want to make an argument to you that property tax rates should be 5% of property value. And here's why. He presents an argument. He goes and sits down. Citizen number 2 gets up at the podium and says, thank you for that presentation. You made a solid argument for us. You gave us some things to think about. But I would suggest that our property tax rate should be only 1/2 of 1%. And here's why. And he makes an argument. He goes and sits down. Third citizen in line gets up and says, thank you for those presentations, but I would suggest our property tax rate should be 2.25%, and here's why. And after there's a number of proposals made, then the mayor says, okay, I think that's enough of the proposals. We've got several very good suggestions on the table. We've heard several good arguments, so just discuss this amongst yourself. And the citizens turn to each other and get in little groups of 3, 4, maybe 5 people and kind of discuss back and forth. What do you think? Well, I don't know. That guy who said 2.25% made a pretty good argument. I don't know. Yeah. And back and forth. And then finally the mayor says, okay, I think that's enough time to discuss things. Let's just vote. And whoever the majority of the citizens decide to side with, that's going to be the property tax rate for the city. And so the vote taken, let's just say the property tax rate, the majority of the citizens say the property tax rate should be only 1/2 of 1%. And the mayor says, okay, that's what it's going to be. Now we move on to the next item on the agenda. And move down through the agenda. And at the end of the agenda, the mayor says, okay, are there any other citizens? Are there any citizens here who have any issues that affect the city that we need to talk about? And maybe a group of citizens stand up over here. And they start waving at the mayor, and the mayor says, yes, do you have anyone to speak for you? And one of the citizens comes up and says, yes, my name is so-and-so, and I speak for all my neighbors over here. We all live on the same street. And we don't know what's going on, but a road crew came through our neighborhood, and they didn't patch the potholes on our street. They patched the one on that street next to us, and they patched the potholes on the next street, but somehow they ended up missing our street. And now we pay taxes like everybody else, so we think we ought to have the potholes in our road patched just like everybody else gets their potholes patched. And the mayor says that's a legitimate issue for the city to talk about. And so there's some discussion, and then there's a vote. And if the majority of the citizens say, yeah, I know that guy, he's a good guy, get the road crew out there and patch up his potholes. Well, then next day the mayor goes to the city road crew and says, I don't know what's going on about here, but you better get over there and patch up the potholes on that road. If, though, the majority of the citizens say, well, they put up with those potholes for a whole year already, we'll just put them on next year's schedule, make sure we get them next year. That's fair. I mean, they lived with us so far. Save us some money on the pothole budget. Well, then that's what gets done. It's just the simple democracy, the rule of authority. Well, at the start of this war with Sparta, the elected leader of Athens is a guy named Pericles. Pericles is the elected leader of Athens. He also serves as the general of the Athenian army. The two jobs kind of go together. And every 10 days, when the assembly meets during a time of warfare, Pericles has to present to the assembly what the battle plan is for the next 10 days, the results of the last 10 days plan, and so on. And the assembly votes and approves these plans. Everything is governed by the citizens. It's a simple democracy. Well, Pericles has a problem, and his problem is that he's the leader of a democracy at a time of war, and the war with Sparta isn't going very well for Athens. No, you probably could have guessed that after I talked about the Spartans last time we were together. The Spartans are tough, and well, they're winning, and they're winning big. And as Pericles walks around Athens, he hears people talking, and people are saying, there's no way we can win this war. There's no way we can beat these Spartans. They're tough. Last week they sent out their 10-year-old girls out after us. Tore us up big time. There's no way we can beat these people. We might as well just give up. I mean, why should me, my father, my brother go off and die in this war when we know we're going to lose? There's no way we can defeat the Spartans. We might as well just give up. Now we know what's going to happen when we give up. The Spartans will make us their slaves. But hey, we'll get out of it with our lives. At least we'll be alive. I mean, being a dead Athenian never did anybody any good. At least we'll get out of this with our lives. I mean, we're better off being live slaves than being dead Athenians. We might as well just give up. And now Pericles has a problem, and that is that he's the leader of a democracy. And the assembly meets every 10 days on schedule. And all it takes at the end of one of these meetings is for Pericles to say, now, are there any citizens here who have any issues we haven't talked about? And all it takes is under Athenian law for two citizens to say, we want to present an issue, and two citizens stand up and say, we have an issue, we think we ought to give up. And there's no way that Pericles can say that's not a legitimate issue to talk about. I mean, that is the issue to talk about. And Pericles is afraid if it comes to a vote, the majority of the citizens are going to say, let's just give up and get out of this war, get out of this thing with our lives. And now Pericles believes in democracy. If the majority of the citizens tell him to surrender, then the very next day he'll go out and surrender his city into slavery to the Spartans, but he doesn't want to. And that's his problem. Well, there's another battle. The Spartans win again. And another group of dead Athenian soldiers are brought back to Athens to be buried. Pericles takes the opportunity to make a speech. It's a speech which has gone down in history as one of the most famous and most effective political speeches in world history. It's a speech called Pericles' Funeral Oration. That word oration is a fancy word that means a speech. And when you come back through and do your reviewing, make sure that you don't be confused. It's not a speech given at Pericles' funeral, but the speech that Pericles gives at a funeral for some dead Athenian soldiers. And Pericles starts off the speech pretty much by saying what I just told you. I'm going to paraphrase and summarize the speech for you. You can find Pericles' funeral oration on YouTube with various people reading it. It takes about 18 minutes to listen to. I'm going to summarize it and paraphrase it for you. Pericles starts off by saying pretty much, what I've said. I understand what the people in the city are thinking. You want to surrender. You ask yourself, why should we go off and die in this war when we know we're going to lose? We're better off being live slaves than dead Athenians. And Pericles says, I understand what you're saying, but you've got it exactly wrong. Pericles says, you're better off being a dead Athenian than a live slave. And Pericles begins to remind his listeners of what makes Athens a unique place in the ancient world. And the very first thing on his list, I'm going to give you a list of what I'm going to call 4 Athenian values that Pericles says are unique about Athens, what makes Athens special in the world. And the first on the list, I just finished talking about democracy. Pericles says we don't model our form of government on anybody else. In fact, we're a model to the rest of the world. Pericles reminds his listeners that if you live in Athens, you live in the only place in the world where the citizens have the power, where the people have the power. The people make the decisions. The citizens make the decisions. Pericles reminds his listeners that of the long process of the development of democracy. But Pericles says it all started off when our great-great-great-grandparents decided we didn't need some little dictator bossing us around. That the people have the power. We don't need to be bossed around. We can make our own decisions. Pericles says, look, if we give up, you might as well say that you do need to be bossed around, because if we give up and become slaves, the Spartans are going to boss us around for the rest of our lives. And not only are they going to boss us around, they're going to boss our kids around. And they're going to boss your kids' kids around. And they're going to boss your great-great-grandkids around. And Pericles says, if you go out and you die for Athens, you're going to be dead. And being dead never did anybody any good, but at least you're going to die saying something. You're going to die saying, you're not going to boss me around. And for that matter, you're not going to boss my kids around. Not as long as I've got anything to say about it. Not as long as I've got any life left. You're not going to boss my kids around. If you're going to boss my kids around, you're going to have to kill me first. Because as long as I'm alive, you're not going to boss my kids around. You're not going to boss my grandkids around. And Pericles says, not only that, what about this? What if it's true? What if it's true that people don't need to be bossed around? What if it's true that people living in dictatorships and people living in slavery who think they need to be bossed around, what if they realize, wait a second, no, you don't need to be bossed around? And if you die for Athens, Pericles says, yeah, you're going to be dead. But at least you died pointing your finger in the face of the bully and saying, you're not going to boss me around, you're not going to boss my kids around, for that matter, you're not going to boss anybody else around. Not as long as I've got anything to say about it. At least you die saying something. Pericles goes on to another value, what we'll call individualism. Pericles says if you die for Athens, you die for a place that believes that you have individual talents and gifts and abilities. Pericles says, if you live in Athens, you live in the only place in the world where you can walk up to a little kid on a street corner, say a 10-year-old little kid on a street corner, and say, hey kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the kid's got an answer for you. Everywhere else in the world, you walk up to a little kid on a street corner and say, hey kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the kid looks at you kind of funny. Doesn't know what you're asking. Doesn't even understand the question. Or maybe thinks he understands the question and says, well, my father's a carpenter, so I'm going to be a carpenter. Or you walk a few more blocks, ask another kid, hey kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the kid doesn't understand what you mean. Says, well, my dad's a farmer, I'm going to be a farmer. And doesn't even understand what you mean. But in Athens, Pericles says, we think that every individual has their own gifts and talents and abilities. And your job in life is to find out what you do best. We don't expect our kids to go into the family business, although an awful lot do. It's not that there's anything wrong with that, because they grow up in the business, they come to love the business, they know the business, but it's not expected. What is expected is that every kid, as they grow up, finds out what they do best, and then they do it. Because if everybody in the city does what they do best, then the city is stronger. Take a look at our enemies, Pericles would say. We don't dress our toddlers up in camouflage diapers and march them around the playground. If you go up to a 10-year-old boy or girl in Sparta and say, hey kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? The kid says, I already am grown up, but I'm a soldier. But we don't do that to our kids. We don't force them into a mold. We expect our kids to be who they are as individuals. And Pericles says if you die for Athens, well, yeah, you'll be dead. But at least you died for a place that gave you the space in your life to become the person you could be. Pericles goes on to another value, what we'll call humanism. Now, this word humanism is one of those words that has different meanings in different contexts, okay? What I mean when I use humanism here is the value of human life, the importance, the specialness of human life. Pericles says if you live in Athens, you live in a place where we live in the only place in the world where we don't offer human sacrifices to the gods, even though the gods tell us we have to. And even though the gods say they're mad at us that we don't, hundreds of years ago, we looked the gods in the eye, figuratively speaking, and we said we don't care. Not even the gods can demand a human sacrifice, because human life is special and sacred. And we told the gods, look, you want to get mad at us? Get mad at us. You want to punish us? Punish us. We don't care. We'll take whatever you got, because no matter what, we're not going to offer human sacrifices to you. Now here Pericles is a bit inaccurate. Okay. As it turns out, there is at the time one other group of people in the world who aren't offering human sacrifices to the gods. Human sacrifice is much more common in the ancient world than I think anybody wants to admit, to be honest. Very, very common. But there is one other group of people in the ancient world at this point who aren't offering human sacrifices to the gods. But we'll cut Pericles some slack, okay? He's never heard of them. And they're a very tiny group of people to begin with. And so we'll cut him some slack. I mean, he's practically right. We'll catch up to those people later on in this, but we'll cut him some slack here. I mean, he's practically right. And Pericles says if you die for Athens, then you die for a place that values human life. And as contradictory as that may sound, as ironic as that may sound, if you die for Athens, you died for a place that says we're going to do everything we can to protect the sacredness of human life. And the fourth Athenian value, rationalism, the life of the mind, thinking about things. Pericles says if you die for Athens, you die for a place that values your mind and your thought. Athens is a place, Pericles says, where we like smart people. We like scientists. We think it's cool that people like to think about science and philosophy and big questions. In fact, Pericles says, we think science is so cool, we took city tax money and we purchased a piece of property so that all the scientists would have a place to hang out and talk about science stuff, because we think that's kind of cool. Pericles says, if you live in Athens, you live in a place that values your education. If you are born into a citizen's family and you want to learn how to read and write, Pericles says, hey, for decades now, we'll take city tax money and pay your teachers. Because we figure the more people around here who know how to read and write, the better off we are as a city. If you want to learn, hey, we'll pay your teachers, because we think that improves the city. Pericles says if you go to an assembly meeting and an issue comes up about which you want to express an opinion, and you get in line and you make it up to the podium, well, the last thing we want to hear is how you feel about anything. Because frankly, nobody but your grandma really cares about how you feel. What we care about is what you think. What are your thoughts? Give us a good argument. Don't appeal to emotion. Don't make us cry. Don't say we have to do something for the children. Don't say we have to do something for the elderly. Just give us a good argument. Don't make us feel sorry. Don't make us feel guilty. Don't make us feel sad. Just tell us, what's the problem? How do we fix the problem? How do we know that when the problem is solved? Take us step by step through the problem. We value your thoughts, and we want to know what your thoughts are. And Pericles says if you die for Athens, you'll be dead, but at least you died for a place that cared about your mind and cared about your thoughts. But Pericles has some more things to say. But these are four big ideas that Pericles at least touches on as he moves through his speech. And the speech works. It's an effective speech. It accomplishes the goal of the speaker. It revitalizes the morale of the people. It reminds the people what the war is all about. In fact, what every war is all about, that in wars there are winners and losers. And the winners impose their values on the losers. That's what war is all about. Winners and losers, and the winners impose their values on the losers. And Pericles asks, whose values do you want to live under, Athenian values or Spartan values? Because it's going to be one or the other. And which one do you want to live under? He reminds them of what the war is all about. He rebuilds the morale of the people. Well, in a world history course, we'd go on and talk about the rest of the outcome of the war. It's a very long war. It takes about 100 years for it to work itself out. It goes on for a very, very long time. But for us in this course, what I think is kind of interesting, looking at this brief summary and paraphrase of Pericles' speech, is that as I gave you that short summary and paraphrase, you probably didn't hear an awful lot that was new. An awful lot of it isn't new to you. The idea of democracy isn't foreign to you. Certainly the word democracy isn't foreign to you. It's a word that Americans in particular like to hear. Americans, in fact, tend to call their own form of government a democracy, even though it isn't, because they like the word. It sounds nice. It sounds nice, because democracy sounds simple and it sounds fair. It just sounds fair. If you have a problem, then you get together all the people who care about the problem. Or what about the people who don't care about the problem? And who cares what they have to say about it? Get together all the people who care about the problem. Let them argue it out. They can, everybody gets to express their opinion. You can make bumper stickers and wave signs and do whatever you want to do. Post on Facebook your opinions about whatever. Argue with everybody. And then at the end of the day, everybody just votes. Who cares to? Votes. And whatever most people want to do about this topic, about the problem, you just go ahead and do it. It just sounds simple. It sounds fair. Politicians use the word democracy an awful lot, even though they know better, because, well, they figured out a long time ago politicians get elected by saying words people like to hear. And Americans like to hear the word democracy. And so when somebody's running for office, even if they're running for dog catcher, they've got to throw in the word democracy every once in a while because voters say, hey, I like that word. That guy said something I like to hear. Um, Individualism, the idea that you have individual gifts and talents and abilities. You already know this. The ability to decide, well, we say it as a joke about college students, what do you want to be when you grow up? But you know what I mean. What do you want to do with your professional life? You've got the ability to make those decisions. A lot of you right now are right there in your lives. You're making decisions about what's the next step in my career, or what's my first career, or what career should I go into. You're sitting there and you're thinking, you know what? What should I do with my professional life? How am I going to make my living for the rest of my life? Um, um, None of this is new. I mean, we got rid of human sacrifices in my neighborhood a long time ago, probably yours too. I mean, it's kind of gotten past that one. Okay. None of this is really earth-shattering stuff. Okay. You've all heard this stuff before. Um, but I suggest to you that if it weren't for the role of Athens in shaping the world that you live in and shaping the culture you live in, a lot of this stuff would be unfamiliar to you. I mean, none of this stuff is really new to you. I mean, this idea of rationalism, I mean, you're college students. You know that you don't pay nearly as much money in tuition, even with the hike over last year. You don't pay near what it costs to have me here and the lights on, the air conditioner blowing, and all of that. Um, uh, the state of Florida provides about half the money here, and students pay a little bit under half. And we've got a foundation here that goes out and raises donations from people for scholarship funding to round out the budget. None of this is new to you, but I suggest if it weren't for the role of Athens in shaping the world you live in, a lot of this stuff would be unfamiliar to you. The idea that you didn't need a dictator bossing you around, how unfamiliar that is. You know how unfamiliar that is to an awful lot of people in the world today who can't imagine what life is like? You know how many people in the world today live in a place where you have to get permission from the government to move to a new apartment? Around here, your lease right, you say, do I want to stay here or go someplace new? Oh, you got to go file down with the government. You know, an awful lot of people are issued maps by the government telling them where they work, where they live, and which route they have to go every day. It's amazing how many people can't imagine living in a place where they didn't have somebody telling them what to do. I think back, I think it was just 3 summers ago, with the demonstrations in Tehran, and there was a reporter from somewhere, I don't know, doing a person on the street interview, and speaking to a young Iranian gentleman who spoke English, a young man, and very sharp, well educated, and the reporter says, "So what do you want to come out of these protests?" And he says, "We want to live in democracy." And the reporter said, "Well, what does that mean to you?" And he looked down at the ground. And he looked at the reporter and he said, I don't know. Because I don't know what it would be like. I don't know what it would be like. But it's better than being told what to do. This guy, when asked to articulate what that would mean, I don't know, but it would be different. It'd be different than being told what to do. The idea that you can grow up and be whatever you want to be in your life within reason. I've lived and worked in parts of the world where you ask little kids what they want to do when they grow up and they don't have any idea what you're talking about. They look at you with a puzzle on their face and they don't understand what you mean. Not only that, it's never dawned on anyone in their village to ever think about what they wanted to be when they grew up. It never dawned on them. Why would they? For generations, nobody who's lived within 100 miles has ever thought about what they wanted to do when they grew up. It's never occurred to them. Well, we can go on here, but I think you get what I'm getting at. These are a lot of big things that people who grew up within a certain place kind of take for granted. But it's not taken for granted by an awful lot of people around the world. And I suggest to you very strongly that if it weren't for the role of Athens in shaping the world you live in, life would be very different. Well, for the next little while, we're going to be focused on a discussion of rationalism, the last thing on the list there, the life of the mind, thinking about stuff. We're going to be moving towards a discussion of philosophy.